to evacuate all Americans from Afghanistan, despite growing calls from critics and allies to extend the final withdrawal date.
We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who we're transporting out, and no disruptions to our operations. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable should that become necessary.
Okay, so for more on this, let's bring in Olivia Gazis. She's joining us now from Washington. So we heard the president there, Olivia, say that he's sticking to the August 31st deadline, but then we also know that they are kind of putting together contingency plans. From what we have been hearing out of Afghanistan, it's very difficult for Americans, for Afghans who are hoping to leave the country to make it to the airport. Can you kind of walk us through why the president kind of keeps saying that he's going to be sticking to this August 31st deadline, and just what are the complications on the ground?
Sure. So, Anne-Marie, as you just said, the short answer about Americans being able to get to the airport is that it's happening only with great difficulty and amid great chaos, and it's even harder for Afghan nationals to get there. Our reporters are hearing that the situation on the ground continues to be absolutely desperate. The window to leave obviously now is closing rapidly, and the Taliban said yesterday that Afghan nationals, they're not going to be permitted to leave. So the president is saying he's nonetheless sticking to this August 31st deadline, citing really two reasons. One, that they are on pace to finish. It remains to be seen if that is the case. And two, that there's a security situation, a burgeoning security situation, in that ISIS-K presents a persistent and acute threat to the security on the ground. The crowds massing there pose an attractive stationary target for that group. The contingencies that the president said that he's requested from the State Department and the Pentagon, we don't have details as to what those are. Obviously, the Taliban has said that it is a red line to cross beyond August 31st. Extending it does not seem to be an option. As of this morning, the White House said that they had evacuated 87,900 people. Of course, we don't know what fraction they are of the total number of people who want to leave Afghanistan. Without that denominator, it is really impossible to know when this operation is complete and whether it's at all a success.
So, Olivia, officials in the United States have warned that terrorists with the group known as ISIS-K, who operate in Afghanistan, could target these massive crowds at Kabul's airport. What more are you learning about that? And for people who may not be familiar with ISIS-K, who are they?
Sure. So ISIS-K is an affiliate group of the Islamic State that's operated in Afghanistan for the past several years. Their ranks had been dwindling for a time, but they've regained strength in recent months. They're assessed to be active and dangerous, and even in the past several months have carried out over 70 attacks in the country, including on Kabul airport last December. They are an enemy of the Taliban, which is why, again, the airport where both Americans and Taliban figures are concentrated poses such an attractive target. The president said yesterday that he had been briefed. The intelligence is persuasive, it's persistent, it's acute, this threat. Not only would an attack on the airport at this time demonstrate operational capacity for ISIS-K, obviously the eyes of the world are on Kabul. It would be a guaranteed spectacle. It would undermine the Taliban at this crucial point when it's trying to consolidate power and establish some sort of governing structure. And it could arguably recruit more militants to the ISIS-K cause. This is precisely the scenario that the administration wants to avoid, and why the president, again, is saying at all costs we need to be out by August 31.
So, Olivia, you reported for CBS News that CIA Director William Burns met with the Taliban's de facto leader in Kabul earlier this week. This is a man, as I understand it, who was imprisoned in Pakistan because of the U.S. So it must have been quite a meeting. What do we know about those discussions and what they were meant to achieve?
Sure. Neither the administration nor the CIA have said anything, obviously, publicly about the content, the nature of the meeting. But coming as it did a week before this deadline, it's easy to assume that among the top tier priorities we're addressing the conditions for the U.S. withdrawal, and the Taliban continuing to cooperate for the most part with providing access to the airport. If part of the aim was to get an extension, it seems that did not work because, again, the Taliban have stayed inflexible on the deadline. Part of the aim, you could also imagine, is to see who it is that we're going to be dealing with. Now that the Taliban is in power in Afghanistan, the U.S. is going to have to figure out, do we have any reasonable interlocutors there? Are they going to be able to cooperate on countering terror threats from groups like ISIS-K? Will they maintain a security relationship with the United States? Bill Burns, the CIA director, is the first career diplomat to be in that role. He spent 30 years at the State Department, is well known to, along with now National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, have engaged in back-channel talks with Iranian representatives that later paved the way to the nuclear deal in 2015. So he's an experienced diplomat. But even as CIA director, it's part of the job to liaise with security partners and have some sensitive discussions that might not be ready for sort of the public diplomatic stage. So it's the highest level in-person interaction that the Biden administration officials have had with the Taliban so far, and it will remain to be seen how much fruit it bears in these waning days.
So, Olivia, what do we know about Abdul Ghani Baradar, especially as the Taliban looks to govern and rule Afghanistan instead of just patrolling certain areas? He was in prison, as Anne-Marie mentioned. He was in prison, but he was released by President Trump under the Trump administration back in 2018. What were the circumstances of his release, and how did he find himself now back at the top of the ruling authority?
Absolutely. So you both mentioned this is a really uncanny history and trajectory that he's now plotted. He's an influential leader within the Taliban, a former military commander who was close to the founder of the group. He's known to be, or at least is portrayed as, a more moderate face of the Taliban. Obviously unclear what moderate means when you're talking about a militant group. And to your point, yes, he spent much of his life in a Pakistani prison as a result of an intelligence operation jointly conducted with Pakistani intelligence. In Karachi in 2010 was when he was arrested, and at President Trump's insistence, he was released in 2018 as the talks with the Taliban were ramping up at that time in the previous administration. He then led those talks with the U.S. and Taliban and paved the way for this deal whose consequences we're seeing playing out. Baradar has an interest now, we've talked about it a little bit, in essentially preventing the country from descending into chaos, right? To show that the Taliban have an ability to govern what is a profoundly changed country, have the ability to prevent an economic and a humanitarian cataclysm from taking root, how to fend off terrorist groups, and potentially make good on some of the agreements that they had forged with the United States. Massive questions and skepticism around all of these questions, of course, remain because, again, we have no idea whether moderate is part of the Taliban's vocabulary.
Olivia, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to deliver remarks on Afghanistan. That's going to happen later on today. What is his role and his focus in this crisis?
Sure. I mean, the chief diplomat of the United States, he's expected to finally offer some insight into these questions that we've persistently been asking, which is, how many Americans are in Afghanistan, how many have gotten out, and what happens if not all of them are out by that August 31st deadline. The administration has said for over a week that it just can't provide that number. The situation is too fluid. Many Americans who have traveled to Afghanistan never registered with the embassy, so there's just no official count. Apparently, we're going to get some insight into that figure. In the past couple of days, the U.S. Embassy has been making personal calls to Americans they think are on the ground, including in other parts of the country beyond Kabul, in order to give them instructions on how they can potentially get out if they want to get out. The best ballpark that we've gotten is that 4,000 Americans and family members have already been evacuated, but we, again, don't know the fraction of the total number of people who actually want to leave the country and how the U.S. plans to get those people who are a little bit more far-flung out. So those are the questions that we'll expect to hear Secretary Blinken address today.
All right, Olivia Gazis for us. As always, Olivia, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We will have full coverage of the Secretary of State's remarks.